There are a lot of moving parts within the casting process for any movie, but even once the right person is found, there's no guarantee they will actually accept the work. Imagine having the chance to star in one or more of these smash hit movies only to turn it down. For a multitude of reasons, that's what these actors did. Some of them are happy with their decision, while others, quite understandably, desperately regret them. So with that being said, I'm Jem from WhatCulture.com, and here are 10 actors who turned down billion-dollar movies. Number 10. Michael Douglas, Frozen. Michael Douglas has had a long and successful career. He's appeared in some incredible films and roles, has won 2 Academy Awards, and has not been shy of joining huge franchises, as shown by his appearances in the MCU. You would be forgiven for thinking that the legendary actor would have little to no regrets about his career, something that he has echoed himself. However, there is a role that he wishes he hadn't turned down, as he told James Corden in 2015. According to Douglas, he doesn't even remember the role he was up for, but the character has nothing to do with his regret. The film in question was Frozen, and the highest grossing movie of 2013 would have been the most profitable role he had ever had. Even with a career as successful as Douglas's, it's no wonder there's a certain regret there. Variety claimed that fans believed the actor turned down the role of Olaf, but can you really see Michael Douglas as the happy-go-lucky snowman? Surely it's more likely to be someone like Pabby, the leader of the trolls, ultimately played by Kyron Hines. Or maybe people are right, and Disney originally had a much different Olaf in mind to the one ultimately voiced by Josh Gad. Number 9. David Cross, Avengers, Infinity War. When the Russo brothers were brought into the MCU for Captain America: The Winter Soldier, it was their first jump into the world of huge blockbusters. Best known for their work on Arrested Development and Community, the brothers brought along many of the actors they had previously worked with on the latter with them. Danny Pudi appeared in The Winter Soldier, while Jim Rash appeared in Civil War, and Ken Jeong and Yvette Nicole Brown appeared in Endgame. There was another actor the Russos tried to bring with them to the MCU, this time from Arrested Development rather than Community. In Avengers: Infinity War, if you look closely, you can see a blue man behind Gamora. In 10 Lear T-Van's collection, a blink and you'll miss it reference to David Cross's character Tobias Funk. In a perfect world, it would have been Cross himself in that glass container. The actor himself said that he would have loved to reprise his role as Tobias, even for such a minor moment, which is saying something because it meant he would have had to completely shave. However, as he was directing a show in London at the time, in spite of very persistent calls and emails from Joe and Anthony Russo, Cross was forced to decline their offer. Number 8. Denzel Washington, Furious 7. Of the 57 movies that have grossed over $1 billion, the vast majority come from huge blockbuster franchises. The fate of The Furious hit the mark in 2017, 2 years after Furious 7, which at the time of writing is the 13th highest earning movie of all time. The franchise is infamous for the sheer amount of star power it can boast, including the likes of Vin Diesel, Dwayne Johnson, Charlize Theron, Brie Larson, Jason Momoa, John Cena, and Gal Gadot, to name a few. But there was almost a name bigger than all of them added to the ranks. Denzel Washington, one of the biggest names in the history of Hollywood, reportedly turned down a role in Furious 7, believed to be that of Mr. Nobody. Certainly not the most important character in the franchise, it arguably would have been more surprising had Washington taken the role. Though Mr. Nobody was ultimately portrayed by another bona fide legend in Kurt Russell, it's hard to imagine Washington in such a small role regardless of the film's success. Surely that would have been a waste of the man's talents, right? Sometimes saying no to all that money makes all the sense in the world. Number 7. Bill Hader and Mindy Kaling, Inside Out 2. Surely, when a hugely successful movie gets a sequel, one of the highest priorities would be to at least get the bulk of the original cast back together again. It's slightly different with animation, however, as voices can be more seamlessly replaced than faces. Following the beloved Inside Out, only 3 of the core 5 returned for the sequel 9 years later. Amy Poehler as Joy, Louis Black as Anger, and Phyllis Smith as Sadness. Bill Hader and Mindy Kaling did not play Fear and Disgust again, although thanks to the performances of Tony Hale and Liza Lapira, you may not have even noticed. The reason why, as with many things in life, has to do with money. And when you see some of the numbers, you can't blame Hader and Kaling for turning the sequel down. According to reports, Amy Poehler was offered $5 million to return as Joy, while the likes of Bill Hader and Mindy Kaling were offered only $100,000, with no added bonuses. Now, I, personally, would jump at $100,000 to do an embarrassing array of things, but based on Hader and Kaling's talents and impressive CVs, it's not really a surprise they've refused such an offer. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below, and while you're there, drop us a like, share and subscribe too, please. Number 6. Lewis Hamilton, Top Gun Maverick. Despite a small list of credits that includes Cars 2 and 3 and Zoolander 2, no one's going to call Lewis Hamilton an actor. However, that didn't stop him from being offered a role in one of the biggest movies of the decade so far, Top Gun Maverick. The Englishman is a legend of Formula One racing, and when he was invited to the set of Edge of Tomorrow, he befriended Tom Cruise. Even before the idea of Maverick had sparked, Hamilton had asked Cruise to cast him for any role in the then hypothetical Top Gun sequel. Hamilton likely thought this conversation was tongue-in-cheek and would never truly amount to anything, but when Top Gun Maverick entered pre-production, director Joseph Kosinski called him and offered him a role as a pilot in the film, a role that ultimately the F1 driver turned down. Thanks to a naturally hectic schedule and a fear of letting the production down since he has absolutely no acting training, Hamilton rejected the opportunity he had asked for all those years before and regretted it immediately. Number 5. Benicio del Toro, Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Benicio del Toro joined the Star Wars universe as DJ in Episode 8, The Last Jedi, and it's as close to universally believed as possible that his talents were wasted. 20 years earlier, he almost joined the franchise in a completely different role, though you could argue that he would have been just as wasted then. The role in question is actually one of the most popular and recognisable characters, Darth Maul. Popular though he may be, his 3 minutes on screen would have been criminally less than someone like Del Toro deserved, despite only being at the beginning of his career. The actor had actually agreed to take on the part for 1999's The Phantom Menace, but ultimately pulled out after George Lucas decided to cut almost all of the character's dialogue. You could argue that his stoic silence added more to the villain than any actual words would have, but any actor would be understandably frustrated with such a situation. Instead, Darth Maul was portrayed in the flesh by Ray Park, and became easily one of the best parts of the underwhelming yet financially successful prequel. Number 4. Rooney Mara, Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. The Phantom Menace is far from the only Star Wars movie to gross over $1 billion. Aside from all 3 of the sequel trilogy hitting the mark, and in the case of The Force Awakens, doubling it, Rogue One, A Star Wars Story also crossed that magical line. The first cinematic Star Wars spin-off that acted as something of a prequel leading directly into the opening scenes of A New Hope was, and still is, a big deal. Felicity Jones led proceedings, but it could have been a lot different. Rooney Mara, arguably best known for her exceptional stint as Lisbeth Salander in David Fincher's Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, met Rogue One director Gareth Edwards, but ultimately chose not to read for the part, as she was at the time working 6 days a week on another film. There was simply no room in her life for a Star Wars lead role. In her interview with Deadline in 2016, Mara says that whether or not she likes the director is one of the biggest factors in any decisions she makes around roles, and that she did like Edwards after their meeting. Had the film cropped up at another time, it could well have been Rooney Mara that led the team that ultimately sparked the beginning of the Rebellion's victory. Number 3. Matt Damon, Avatar. All 10 actors here, for one reason or another, turned down the opportunity to appear in a $1 billion movie. Matt Damon took this one step further, however, and with it turned down the offer of 10% of the box office intake. Unfortunately, the film in question for the Jason Bourne actor was Avatar, and that 10% kickback would have equated to a staggering $250 million. Even Damon himself concedes that this may have been the largest sum an actor has ever declined. When James Cameron offered him the role, Matt Damon still had a lot of work to do on the Bourne film he was working on at the time, and because he didn't want to leave the project early and leave the production in the lurch right at the last, he rejected Avatar. Quite noble when you consider that he was desperate to work with the acclaimed director. The idea has since been floated for Damon to have a cameo appearance in one of the upcoming 3 Avatar sequels, which Cameron would welcome with open arms, but in regards to the actor still receiving 10% of the box office, his thoughts were best not printed for polite company. Suffice to say, the first word of his 2-word response began with an F. Number 2. Josh Brolin, Jurassic World. After making a name for himself as Andy Dwyer in Parks and Recs, and subsequently being cast largely in comic relief supporting roles, Chris Pratt enjoyed what can only be described as an absolutely incredible rise to Hollywood stardom. The actor debuted as Star-Lord in 2014's Guardians of the Galaxy and the following year as Owen Grady in Jurassic World, both of which went on to become incredibly successful trilogies. However, the latter only came to him after it had been offered to and rejected by his future Avengers Infinity War castmate Josh Brolin. He is no stranger to big roles, with the likes of The Goonies, No Country for Old Men, and Sicario on his CV, as well as being involved in huge blockbuster franchises like the MCU and Dune. Still, according to him himself, Owen Grady just wasn't something that he could see himself doing. There are plenty of actors who would look back at this decision with regret, particularly with the successes of the movie, going on to be a very financially healthy trilogy, but that's not the view Brolin takes. He couldn't be happier for the franchise and for Chris Pratt, who he says was definitely the right man to take the role. And number 1, Robert Downey Jr., Deadpool and Wolverine. Writing Deadpool and Wolverine must have felt like being a kid in a candy store. They got to bring back so many Fox characters, including Chris Evans as Johnny Storm, as well as a couple of MCU cameos, but just think of the ideas they had which didn't make it to the final cut. Reportedly, there was an idea for Wade to revisit previous MCU scenes and another to bring back the original 6 Avengers, but that ultimately never happened. There was also an early plan for Happy Hogan to be joined by Tony Stark at the beginning of the film. Before Robert Downey Jr. was announced to be returning to the MCU as Doctor Doom, as revealed just days after Deadpool and Wolverine was released, the Iron Man actor was actually sent a script that would have seen him return as Tony Stark. This wouldn't have been as a variant, but as the Tony Stark we all know and love in a flashback to 2018, before we even knew the names of Thanos. The Deadpool and Wolverine team at the time had no idea about RDJ's upcoming Doctor Doom announcement, which is understandably why he had to reject the chance to reprise the role. Probably best the Earth 616 Tony Stark is left alone, really.